Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this live streamed presentation, Making Every Drop Count, a Guide to Water-Wise Gardening. This program is brought to you by the Los Alamos County Department of Public Utilities. I'm Krista Tyson, nice to see you. And you can hear Denise, I'll introduce her in a minute. I'm the Visitor Services Manager for Pajarito Environmental Education Center, or known as PEEC. We are a nonprofit that runs the Los Alamos Nature Center, located here in lovely Los Alamos, New Mexico. And I will be the moderator for this evening's talk. So I'm making Denise a co-host. She'll be our presenter this evening. And she's also a staff member here at the Nature Center. Just to tell you a little bit about what's going on, the Los Alamos Nature Center is currently closed, but we still have lots of ways you can interact and connect with nature. Check our website, peaknature.org, for our Take It Outside initiative, especially for the closure and for more live streamed presentations like this one. We'll send you an evaluation form after this talk, and we'll use your comments to improve future programs. We are able to offer programming at this time because of our wonderful members and donors. So I'd like to send a special shout out to you for your generous support. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, and now a little bit about Denise. Denise is an environmental educator, gardener, and a permacultural advocate. Denise has used permaculture techniques to inspire a transformation of her own 3-acre beautiful property in White Rock, New Mexico. Denise has a bachelor's degree in biology and a master's in science education. She leads Nature Playtimes, a very popular PEEC program for PEEC, and also serves as an instructor for our year-round school field trips and classroom visits. She has taught science in the classroom and is an environmental educator for the past 12 years. She is passionate about providing kids with the opportunity to connect with the local environment through child-directed outdoor exploration and inquiry. So I'm going to stop my screen share and turn it over to you, Denise. Thank you for being here.
Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for listening in tonight. I'm excited to talk to you guys about soil health and conserving water in your garden. Usually I am an educator for kids, so it is nice to be speaking with adults tonight. I have recently moved to a large piece of property in White Rock, and so I have been working on a garden transformation down there using some specific principles of building soil and trying to kind of use the model a natural ecosystem. And so I'm going to talk about that process. And hopefully it'll be useful for you guys, and in your garden planning processes, you can take some of these methods and apply them as well. So when we think about soil and water and conserving water, I think it's important to think kind of big picture. Why does soil health matter? What impact does it really have on our garden? I think sometimes it's easy to dump a whole bunch of soil that you maybe purchased in bags into like a raised bed, and then some people have issues with different things. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of those issues might be, and hopefully some solutions to those. And then what makes healthy soil, what soil types absorb the most water, how can you add amendments to your soil, how can you directly water soil, the life in the soil and the root systems, how can you use rainwater in your garden, how can you limit runoff and limit evaporation. And those are all a lot of topics, so hopefully we can get to all of them, but this will be kind of big picture, and it's definitely a jumping point to look deeper into things. This is a picture of my garden and some of the things I have growing in there. And I will get to talking more about specifically like how I made my garden, but first I'm going to talk more about, it's really soil science and how I built my soil and how you can build your soil. Hopefully it doesn't get too sciencey for some of you guys, but it is interesting and it is useful. So just to start, I think everyone has their challenges with gardening in New Mexico and anywhere, but specifically in this area, we do have a lot of weather challenges. We have those late spring freezes. That snow is in, I think it was April. You have the hail, you have the sandy clay, you have intense sun and wind and huge changes in temperature. And so these are all things that we deal with as gardeners and that we can't do a lot about. So I do like to talk more about what we can do and what kind of changes we can make. And so to start thinking about that, I would like to hear a little bit more about you guys and what kind of challenges you're having in your garden. I have a pop-up question that Krista, I think, will put on the screen for me, just to ask a little bit more about your own gardens and what kind of concerns you have. So we have, what is a main concern you have with your garden? My plants grow slowly and stay small. My soil dries out quickly. Pest management, inconsistent watering, soil low in nutrients, or maybe there's something other. And if there's something other, you could always put it in the chat box. All right, so it looks like the most people have problems with your plants growing slowly and staying small. And that is a common problem around here. And so luckily that is something I definitely will talk about and how we can change that. And then also soil drying out quickly. And those two things are really connected. So some of the approaches that I have to building soil will really help those issues. Pest management is something that goes along with permaculture. And I will touch on that a little bit. And if people have more specific questions, we can maybe get into that, and we'll just have to see how much time we have. And then soil low in nutrients is definitely very connected to that. Your plants growing slowly and staying small, and plants really having access to nutrients. So, so that's great to know, and we'll be talking about all that. All right, we'll go on to our next slide. Okay. So one thing that we can change is the soil, and that's exciting because we do have control over that, and it can really, really impact the success of our garden. Improving soil health in general, this term soil health, will do a lot of things. It will improve your soil structure. It will increase your water infiltration into your soil and how much water you're really holding in your soil. It will provide a habitat for soil organisms to live and increase the soil food web in your soil, which isn't a term a lot of people talk about, but there is a really important soil food web that exists underground that we'll talk more about and why that's important for your plants. And you can see over in this picture on the right, good soil structure, where you have these pores that are allowing the roots to grow through and to grow deeper and bigger, where your compacted soil can make things really tough for plants, where the roots just really can't grow and they don't have any pore space to be and to extend out, and for the water to be and the air to be. All those things are all really squished, and it can often result in small plants that aren't really producing. So we can talk more about how to improve that soil. When you do improve soil, you have increased nutrients available to plants, you have space for roots to grow, you have nutrient cycling year after year, and you can reduce the water that you're using. Okay, most people probably have seen the soil texture triangle. It's common, but I'm not sure that we spend a lot of time thinking a lot about the impact it has on the way we garden. So you have clay, silt, and sand. Those are your three sides. And soil is a combination of those three things. All soils, the soil texture is. So all soil is going to have a combination of these three things, and it really depends on where you live and the parent material going into making your soil. There's different characteristics for each type of texture. So, you know, if you have clay, you're going to have, it's going to hold on to water, but it's going to be hard for plants to access that water. It's going to be easily compacted. It does store nutrients well. And then silt, You have high water holding capacity, which is great. Actually, I can't see. Let me see. Okay. You have slow to medium drainage, so it's gonna drain okay. It's able to store nutrients. Silt is actually a really great material to have, and it's what makes up a lot of like the Midwest. It's usually exists where there's been like rivers, large rivers or glaciers, things that have really grinded down that parent rock material, and it's not something we have as much in New Mexico. Sand, we have a lot of sand often, and it has a low water holding capacity, and it has a high drainage, so things will go through. I'll talk more about what my soil results were, but sandy clay seems to be a common thing around here. Oh, there you go. Okay, so what aspects of soil impact plant growth and water conservation? So when you're thinking about these three types of texture, sand, silt, or clay, what is going to impact the water that is being held into the soil and how your plants are growing? And the soil texture is actually really connected to how much drought resistance you have. If you have, I should have mentioned this. So back at our soil texture triangle, really an ideal garden soil is going to be a combination of those three things where it's pretty loamy. That's what people will call it. It's that loam right in the middle. Clay loam, it can be good. Silty loam can be great. Sandy loam is probably going to have a little bit of high drainage rates. So if you do have that loam soil, you might be able to hold on to quite a bit of water, but if you have that clay soil, you might start having water depletion and seeing drought in your plants at 25% depletion. So your soil might look wet, but the plants are not actually able to access that water. And that's because if you look down at that clay picture, the clay particles are really, really tiny and they're highly charged and they hold on to water. So they kind of just, water goes all around them and holds on to it. And there's not a lot of pore space in between for the roots or any other extra water to just stay and be available for a plant. So that's why clay soil makes things difficult in hot, arid conditions. So to enhance plant drought resistance and nutrient uptake, you can think about these three things: plant available water capacity, water infiltration, and microorganism life. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk about those three things and how it impacts your soil. First of all, you want to think about your soil structure. Soil is made of water, air, organic material, and mineral. And your mineral would be where your clay, silt, and sand fits into. So you can see in the well-structured soil, you want soil that has large pores, water's available, there's air pockets, there's places for microorganisms to live. In poorly structured soil, you'll have really small pore space where you don't have a lot of any other space for those things to be, which makes growing for a plant really difficult. And you can see that in the ideal picture, kind of enlarged what's really going on in that pore space. So when we think about that, we can think about your water holding capacity. How much water can your soil actually hold? If you have really clay soil, then all your clay particles might be just really holding on to that water and not really allowing those roots to soak up the water. So you think you're watering, but the plants really aren't getting much of that water. Where on the other end of the spectrum, you might have sand where water is just flowing right through and it's not really being trapped in any of that pore space. And so you have to water all the time and it's still hard for the plants to access the water. So you're using a lot of water. Where you're kind of in the middle, you can have the pore space available for water to kind of hang out and be there for when the plants need it. If you look at the measurements for the different textural classes, you have silty loam is what holds on to the most water. Now, we can't just make silty loam around here. Your soil texture is kind of what it is, but we can improve the ability of our soil to absorb that water, and I'll talk about that. Yeah, you can kind of just see that range there where your sand is pouring right through, your clay is holding on to that. Okay. So that's another way to look at it. That's available water for plants. It's right in the middle there, your silty loam. That water is sitting there available. In the sand, it's flowing right through. And in the clay, it's called hydroscopic, where it just holds on, the clay particles hold on to the water and really don't allow plants to access the water. So why am I talking so much about soil micropores? And that's because micropores are really important. If you don't have that soil structure that allows for the air and the water to exist and be trapped in there, your plants are going to have a really hard time growing. And that's why we often see small plants that really aren't producing very much. They just can't get the nutrients and the water that they need to really be prolific. And then you'll see another thing in this diagram that has organic matter. So the amount of organic matter that you have in your soil is really important. And so we'll talk about how we can improve our soil structure with organic matter. And you'll see some other things too, like the fungal hyphae and the bacterial colony. So you have bacteria, you have fungi, you have air, you have water, you have your, down here you have meso and microfauna. Those are all your little soil organisms that are living in there. All of those things together are what make good structure and what make your soil, which makes you able to conserve water, really. Because if you have good structure, then your soil is going to maintain its moisture and your plants are going to grow well, even without you watering all the time. And so it's something really important to think about. I think people often think about when conserving water, just like how they're watering, like maybe if they're watering in the morning or the middle of the afternoon, or if they're using rainwater catchment from like barrels. But there's also a lot that just goes into how the water stays in the soil and if you're able to maintain that moisture in your soil. So maintaining optimal water holding capacity, you know, you can water way too much on one end and it's just draining through. And you can water too much, but your plant's doing good, but your soil is really wet and you might be wasting water. Or you can water where you have some pore space available still, and that's really where you want to be. You want to have some air in there. It's for the microorganisms and the roots to breathe. And then if you don't have enough water, your plants are going to die, obviously. So watering too much, I will say something about that with compaction. So if you don't have good soil structure and you really have just like brand new soil that you just poured into like a raised bed or something like that, and you're just soaking it with water, any pore space that is there is going to start to collapse. And so that's when you start to see some of that compaction and that runoff on the surface where water is really not going into the soil. It just kind of stays on top and kind of slowly filters in, but it doesn't really have a lot of space to go into. Okay, so you can identify your soil texture through so there's jar tests that you can do, and I did do this. You have your native soil. This is an example of my native yard soil and my garden soil, and you can see the difference in color there. And the garden soil is really due to that dark color is because of the organic matter that's in there. So it has a lot more organic matter, a lot more structure to it. And I did go through and do it. It was hard for me to really see great results with the jar test. Maybe some other people have had better results, but the information is really important. And so I just sent mine in for to be tested at an actual lab. And I thought that was a lot more useful information. I'll talk about that. I send it into Colorado State University and they test it exactly what it is, and also with all the nutrients available in it. So they're giving me a percentage of clay, silt, and sand again. Same triangle that we looked at before. So my results were here. You have your native yard soil. I had sandy clay loam is what they called it. And then for my garden soil, I had just straight loam. And you can see the difference in percentages between the two. You know, it's not, I mean, they are different, but there's a mixture in both of them. What they do say with that amount of clay in the sandy clay loam is that the soil will drain at a low to very low rate. And this, it'll make it tough for water to really get down into some of the roots. And then also it'll just run off, like in August when we get our monsoons, that's gonna be an area where there's a lot of runoff. And that's not something we want in the yard. And then the loam, you can see the organic matter is 11.1%, where the organic matter in my native yard soil was 2%. And so, I mean, I think everyone around here knows that organic matter in our soil is very low. In the native soil in Los Alamos is not high, and that's typical of high desert areas. And so that is an issue for plant growth. You definitely need higher organic matter. They recommend at least 5%, but with 11%, they consider that high. Although, I mean, I've been having great success in my garden, so I'm not trying to make mine go lower. I think having it be high is a good thing. And then my soil will drain at a medium to low rate, which may allow it to retain water more efficiently, meaning that that water has space to go. And so it will go in there and it will be stored in those pores and then drain out slowly, but not too slowly. And that's a good thing. So when you get these results, you're like, okay, this is my soil, what am I gonna do? Especially like the native yard soil, I have a lot of places in my yard that I'd like to grow more things in. How am I going to make it more livable for plants? And really the best thing that you can do is add organic matter. It saves you the most money and it's the most practical. You can't really change the texture of your soil in terms of adding sand, silt, or clay. I mean, you could in a really small amount, like a really small bed, but if you want to do it on a larger scale, then it would just take a lot of material. So, you know, sometimes I put a little bit of sand in my carrot beds to make it a little more, to drain a little better and be a little easier for the roots to go through. But in general, or adding organic matter is going to be the best way to change the structure of your soil. Okay, so infiltration rate, this is one of the other big aspects when you're thinking about conserving water in your garden. The velocity at which water enters the soil is the infiltration rate. So how fast it's going into the soil. And you can test this. There's a picture there. There's a tube and you pour water in there, like it's supposed to be 1 inch of water, and then you time how fast it goes in, and you can compare different soils in different places around your yard. You'll see big differences between somewhere where like cars drive versus where no one really walks ever. The garden soil versus just regular native soil. Again, your loam soil is going to have the best infiltration rate. And you want the infiltration rate to be good, because otherwise during like anytime you get rain, the water is going to run off your property and go somewhere else. And you want water to stay on your property. And we don't get very much water in New Mexico, so any water that we do get, as gardeners, we want to keep it in our soil so that we have the most moisture as possible. Sandy soil will have high infiltration rates, but it may not hold on to that soil well. And then clay soil, it usually, like in the monsoon season, it rains way too hard and fast for that clay soil to absorb the water that fast, and it'll just run off. And I'm sure you guys have all seen that when we're having our monsoons. So really our job is to find a way to create soil that will absorb water, and then also create a system that directs water into a place to be stored until it can be used. And so we'll talk about that. And that doesn't mean that you have to have like a big rain catchment system. I'll talk about ways to do that more naturally with your landscape. If you don't have, if you don't do anything and you do have high infiltration rates, there's a lot of problems that can happen. You have water ponding on the surface, you have erosion carrying away the nutrients and chemicals and soil. And if you're working so hard to build your soil, you really don't want erosion carrying away your soil. And then you have those bigger issues like sedimentation in like rivers and things like that, that diminish the water quality, especially if there's pollutants in that water. Poor soil aeration, which makes roots not be able to grow. Ponding at the soil saturation. So it can, destroy the soil structure. And that ponded water, if it does sit there in a pond, it will evaporate quickly. So there's just like, there's a myriad of different things that can happen with runoff, and you want to try to keep that water on your property. And so we'll talk about how gardeners can do that. We have a solution coming up in a few slides about holistic landscape that works to hold on to that water. Okay, that third issue that we were talking about was microorganism life, and that's another big aspect of your soil. So you have water infiltration. How is the water going into your soil? You have your soil structure, and then you have the animals in your soil and the life in your soil. So there is a soil food web, and you have organic matter there at the bottom, and you have bacteria eating that organic matter, you have protozoa eating it, you have nematodes and fungi, and then those organisms are being eaten by arthropods, and you're like larger beetles and things, and then you have the birds eating those. So there's a whole system or cycle that exists, and you want to keep that system going. And the reason is because they really do a lot for your soil. It's considered an ecosystem service, if you've heard that term before. And that's something that the ecosystem does naturally that helps just the world continue to cycle. So you have those soil organisms driving nutrient cycling and regulation of water flow and storage. You have regulation of soil movements, creating that structure, and a regulation of pests. So the nematodes often eat other bad pests, and you can actually buy nematodes and add them to your soil. You have soil structure maintenance, and then they're detoxifying the pollutants and regulating atmospheric conditions. Soil stores CO2. So you have, I didn't mean to click. You have all these things that they can do. So I'll just kind of summarize them carefully, because you really don't want to underestimate the importance of that soil biodiversity. They really are doing a lot to help plants grow. And in like a natural forest, these things would all exist. In gardens, they don't always exist right away because the soil is often new and just being created. And so it takes time for these kinds of ecosystems to develop that food web. So you have bacteria, which is really important in breaking down nutrients. You have nitrogen fixing bacteria, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. It actually takes nitrogen from the air and puts it into a form that can be used by plants. And it's really crucial for any of your garden beds, because it's putting nitrogen back into your soil after you've been using your soil. So you've been growing stuff in it and taking those nutrients out. You need something to put those nutrients back in. And so nitrogen fixing plants, which are legume plants, are really important to be putting back into your soil. And so that's why people use cover crops. They'll put those in the winter so that bacteria that's living on some of those legume plants are going to be adding nitrogen back into your soil. Fungi will help make water and nutrients available, amino acids, all these things to be absorbed by the roots. So roots aren't exactly great at absorbing nutrients by themselves. They need the help of bacteria and fungi and all that to make those nutrients available. And so that's what fungi are doing. Protozoa are part of that food chain. They're grazing on other organisms. They're releasing waste, which all have nutrients in them. Nematodes doing that same thing, and then also eating some of the types of animals like those June bug larvae. I don't know if anybody's had any trouble with those, but I had trouble with those in my garden, and they will actually go and like kill those June bug larvae. So you can do some great things with nematodes. And then you have your larger arthropods like earthworms and mites and springtails, spiders and beetles, all completing that food web and making space in your soil, like earthworms, burrowing through and making more pore space for water and air to exist. So we know that all of these animals and organisms do so much for the soil. So we really want to think about how we can make a home for these organisms. And I think that's a way that something people don't usually think about gardening. They kind of think of, how can I get my plants to grow? But it's actually kind of useful to think of it as, how can I make a home for the soil food web? Because if there's a healthy soil food web in your soil, then your plants are going to grow and they're going to have a lot of nutrients available. So going back to that picture of having pore space, having spots for these animals to live. So you want to provide soil structure with micro and macropores. You don't want to add chemical fertilizers to your soil. They can be really harmful to some of the bacteria and microorganisms. And there's a lot of reasons not to add chemicals, but in terms of soil health, it's not useful to add chemicals that are going to enhance your plant growth, when really that is the job of the soil organisms if they are functioning well. And herbicides and pesticides obviously are going to kill those all that soil biodiversity. So you really want to feed your soil organisms, just like, almost like a pet. How are you going to keep these animals, the soil biodiversity alive? You need to feed it with things that they would eat. So compost, leaf litter, manure, rotting wood, all of those things that start that web of life. And do not till your soil, because if you till your soil, you're just breaking all those pores, that pore space. And you're, all that work of the aggregates forming and all the organisms finding places to live and the pore space forming, when you till, it just breaks that all down and then it has to start over. Okay, so there's a lot that I talked about, so we can think about some of these solutions. We know we want to improve soil structure. We know we want to increase soil's water holding capacity. We want to increase soil infiltration. We want to increase soil biodiversity. We want edible yields that we can, that's why we're gardening, right? And we can conserve, and we want to conserve water and minimize the amount of work. We don't want our garden to take our entire life. So what can we do to make this all work? And I'm a real advocate for permaculture because it takes into account all of these things. And so it uses a sustainable agricultural landscape design and ecology. And it models a system after the natural ecosystem, like how forests work, how are all these plants able to grow out in the forest and out in our scrublands and all that without any assistance from anybody. So it uses a lot of those concepts. And it was developed in the 1970s by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. And there's a lot of books and things that you can get about it. It means permanent agriculture. So it does have an emphasis on perennials and not just annuals, and creating food forests that create this beneficial plant community where the plants are all working together. The first thing that in permaculture is a huge idea. Actually, it has a whole set of values that go along with it. But I'm not going to get a lot into all of that right now because we just have an hour. But I will talk about what it speaks to when you're talking about planning a garden and how to set up those initial plants. So the first thing it really wants you to do is think about the water flow on your property and to watch the water flow on your property. Think about where it goes. So like in the monsoon season, where does the water tend to pool and pond at? Because those are the places that you can take advantage of. So the idea of digging a swale is looking at the contours of your land and then using that place where it would naturally pool and digging a swale to capture that runoff. So you can see that on the left, you have it in line with the contour. They've dug the swale where it's parallel with the contour, meaning that when the water flows down, it'll grab that water and hold on to it. Where if you were to make your swale perpendicular, you're not going to get as much water, or if your garden bed, if you made it that way, you're not going to absorb that water flowing down. So you really want to think about where you're putting your garden bed, or swale, and then here you have just kind of a picture of what that swale is doing. So water comes down, it fills up a swale, and a swale is just a dug out large trench, really. You're just digging out a space right on the contour line, which does have to be measured, and there are ways to do that. And allowing it to fill with water. And that water will then slowly trickle in and give water to the plants around it. Have you noticed there's not a garden bed made by the swale? And there are several reasons for that, but if you have a swale filled with water, especially in New Mexico, it's only going to be filled certain times. So you want to be watering things that have deep roots and are perennials that don't need to be watered every single day. So the idea is to water some of those larger trees and perennials, and then we'll talk about why that is. So directing water flow with the garden swales, these are just some examples. They have a swale built, and then they planted trees in the area right on the upside of it, which is a great system because it'll fill with water and it'll water those trees. And if you were somewhere where it rained a lot, you might never have to water those trees. If you're somewhere like New Mexico, you'd have to watch them, and you might get a lot of water out of the rain. And then if it did get too dry in some of the really dry months, you would then water those trees too. So just some ideas of how to do that. You're trying to slow, spread, and sink that seasonal water to be stored in your soil. And you can do that with different materials, thinking about what infiltrates well. And you're watering perennials. That's a big part of permaculture. We'll get into the hügelkultur also, but right now you can see that there's a swale, and they have built up this mound on the bottom side of the swale to grow things, but they're growing things that are basically perennials, things that are going to create this layered effect and grow some taller trees. And that's because in permaculture, the idea is to create microclimates through larger trees that will shade and create some cooler environments down below, which is really ideal for New Mexico because we do have such hot, intense sun. All right, so you saw the hügelkultur bed. That's where all those like circles are, because what that's showing is this concept of making a hügelkultur garden bed. And the idea is that you put large logs and branches down at the bottom, and then you have larger branches on top of that. You have it filled with grass and manure kind of filled in with that. You have smaller twigs, grass clippings and manure more, topsoil and compost. So that's one system. People layer it in a lot of different ways actually, but the main concept is that you have big logs and branches down below. And that's because it helps to retain moisture. So as the wood starts to decompose, it retains that moisture and releases nutrients, and it also generates heat, which can be a good thing if you're trying to do some early spring gardens or some fall gardens. The branches and wood absorb rainfall and provide structure for aeration and infiltration. So some of those smaller twigs, and then you have your grass clippings and your manure, all those things are going to work to build up soil that has really good structure. It's really diverse and has a lot of different parts to it. And it creates a loamy soil is what you really want. All of those parts working together are building soil rather than having soil that's already kind of made and then starting to lose nutrients. This is an example of someone actually making one. Sepp Holzer, he's an expert in this field, and he has a large hügelkultur bed going there, and then his final result is a mound shape, and it's said to limit the compaction and increase the surface area. So in general, hügelkultur beds are made in a big mound shape. This one's like particularly high and angled, and they do say that that's a good approach to it, although I didn't exactly follow that approach, so you can see the way that I did mine. If you notice, if you start looking into hügelkultur beds, people make them very differently, and there's very different approaches and materials that people use. The idea being that you're still using like recycled materials from your yard and from the landscape to build healthy soil. These are some other designs that I think it's nice to see, because not everybody wants a mound like the one you saw on the last slide. Some people are trying to create a landscape also that they like, and so like the one has rocks around it looks really nice. You have a long skinny one that uses logs on the side. It just depends what you're trying to do in your yard. And I think people have all sorts of different goals, and so you just have to think about what is going to work for you and what you really want to have your yard be like. So conserving water in your garden. So I talked about all these things, directing water flow. So all these things can help conserve water in your garden. Directing water flow with swales in areas of high infiltration, using the hügelkultur method, planting native trees to provide that shade and that microclimate that you can then plant under. And you'll plant like annuals under that. And then looking to, this is something I didn't talk about, but looking to traditional food crops from like indigenous cultures around here and seeing what things grow well in this climate. This Native Seed Search is a great organization that accesses a lot of native seeds from around here. This is something that people don't talk about a lot, but building sunken beds. So you actually don't make a raised bed, but you build it, you dig out the material and then put everything inside, which by making it deep in the earth, you really hold on to that moisture and don't lose that water. Don't lose water through evaporation. Mulch heavily with straw and shredded, or you can use other things like shredded bark or grass clippings, leaves, or pine needles. All those things work, but if you don't mulch, your soil will dry out really quickly, and that's really stressful for plants because they're going up and down of water and no water and water and no water. And if plants don't feel like they're getting a consistent amount of water, they will not grow quickly. They will just kind of maintain themselves because they don't know for sure if they're going to get a lot more water. Irrigate at night, early morning with drip irrigation rather than a sprinkler or a hose. So those are all great things that you can do. I can talk a little bit more about how I did some of that in my garden. I don't want to run out of time, and there's not a ton of time left, so I'll try and just kind of go quickly through this. When I started to build my hügelkultur bed, I installed drip irrigation very first. And I did that because I wanted to do it underground, and I wanted to get all that in so that I could build the beds around it. Drip irrigation is really crucial for having consistent watering and using less water. I'm talking about stress again to plants. If you're not watering consistently, then your plants won't grow a lot because they just feel like they aren't getting enough water. So that drip, does it all the time where you don't have to think about watering, and it uses less water, and it can be used in a variety of settings, and applies that consistent water at a rate that can be absorbed by the soil without runoff waste. Basically, when you build a drip irrigation system, you can have, there's two ways to do it. You can do it pretty simply, where you just have a faucet and you connect a timer, you connect the filter or backflow preventer, and then a filter, pressure regulator, and your tubing. And you have all those things connected, and it's right from your faucet, and it'll go right, kind of, you go down to the next picture, that's that tubing. You can buy different connectors that like tee it and angle it in different ways. And then from that mainline tubing, you put smaller tubing. It's called a 1/4 inch drip line usually. And you can make all sorts of, there's all sorts of little attachments you can put there for if you wanted to water different ways. But it's a really easy way to do it, and it's not very expensive. It works for smaller gardens if you don't have a lot of space and a lot of different zones that you want to do. And you could even split this and maybe do 2 different zones or 3 different zones or whatever. I think maybe 4 zones is the limit for the faucet ones. So I think that's like a really good way to start if you haven't used a drip irrigation before. It's pretty simple to do, and you can still have a timer. If you want something bigger and more complex, if you have a lot of zones or a lot of space, then I would definitely recommend going with a larger system. So this has 16, or we have a zone that has 16 zones, and it's something like this where you're connected to a valve box, and the valve box has a lot of different options, and then you use like a programmable timer box that you can do, and you can actually control it with your phone, and it's pretty awesome. But it takes a lot more setup, and I would recommend a professional to do it. It's a little complex to do on your own. If you really get into it, you can definitely, there's people that do it on their own, but we had a professional install ours, and it just can have so many things go wrong that I think it's worth it. So in the picture below, you can see my black tubing coming up at each bed. So the drip irrigation runs underground, and then it comes up on each bed. So I can turn off and on for each bed. Okay, and so from here, you know, then you just want to think about how much you're watering. If you have clay soil, watering, it's holding on to more water, versus sandy soil, it's flowing right through, and that affects the type of emitters that you use. And you can calculate how much water is going out and how much water you can do, and I won't go into those calculations right now, but it's pretty simple to figure out, and then you can know how much line you can use. Okay, so then we dug out our beds, and we have our beds kind of going out in I made like a circular fashion, and I put gravel trenches next to it just to increase the amount of infiltration that's going in next to it, hoping that some of that water will flow into the beds and maintain moisture down below. And then we added logs and branches and water. It's important to add lots of water while you're doing it, getting those logs really wet, adding manure and straw, and then water. And so that's just a truck of horse manure that we got, and we put that right in there and let it decompose over the winter. And so you have your straw and manure layer, and then I added grass clippings and leaves and any kind of green material that you have. People put old sod in there if they're building these in grassy areas. Any kind of green material you can put in. All right, and then we have we finished it with with like finished compost and topsoil, and then I put in my smaller drip lines and mulched with straw, and those are our first 2 beds. And things grew really well the first year. We had 2. I'll go here first. We had 2 the first year, and then I added 7 more the next year, and then another one along the fence, and so we're just keeping and adding more and more. So as I continue to do this, I'm going to think more about permaculture as a way of thinking about my garden. So how am I recycling these nutrients? And seeing your garden as a system where when nutrients leave your garden, there's a break in that system. So how can you give back to the soil? And you can do that by using green mulch and letting that decompose back in, by planting plant communities like corn, like native corn, and then the dry runner beans that will give nitrogen back to the soil. And then planting flowers and different things, those are actually carrot flowers, to attract those beneficial insects and try and create a balance between some of the pesky insects that might be eating your plants. In the future, we are planning to build a swale along the fence line to feed more perennials and plant more fruit trees. I have planted about 20 fruit trees, but you know, they're small and take time, and we'll just keep adding, and doing more diversity and cover crops. And we'll see how things go over the years. With that, I know that was a lot, so I'm hoping that some people might have questions or anything else they might want to talk about.
We did have one question, and we are able to launch the poll questions now. Sorry about the technical difficulty.
Oh, that's, sure, you can, yeah, you can do it.
Okay. My assistant Katie will be launching the polls. Thank you.
And that's about soil texture. Do you know what soil texture is in your garden? 60% saying they don't know the soil texture, 33% saying yes, and I've never, and maybe never hearing it until now. And it's very common for people not to know the soil texture. So I think it's useful information so that you can really start to put amendments that will help your soil, and just know what you're working with when you're trying to create a watering schedule. Okay, and so then the other one was, you can do question number 3, what watering system do you use? Okay, so it looks like a lot of people are using just like a hose going out. Maybe they have a sprayer from that, or just sprinklers set up, but 31% have drip irrigation. And so I would just encourage you to really think about the drip irrigation system if you don't already have it, because it can be so easy to set up and it saves so much time. And you can just do it. I think some people might think, oh gosh, it's really complicated and expensive, and you really can just do it from your hose. Setting up it's pretty simple. I have some resources at the end actually that show some links to some really great websites that show how to set it up. And then you can just buy it at Home Depot, or even Metzger's has a lot of good options for stuff. So it's just not too hard. And it just saves so much water and money that it's really worth it. All right. Any questions that people are thinking of, or any ways that I can help?
I do have some questions. Jessie wanted to know, what is the best way to add organic matter to soil? She joined a little bit late, so if you already covered that, maybe we can email her the answer. If you haven't covered it, please share.
Okay. Hi, Jessie. Yeah, no, so organic matter you can do in a lot of ways. I mean, it can just be buying, if it's a small bed, it can be adding compost, but like from a bag, but I would recommend using more raw materials. So having your own compost pile and then getting like manure from a horse or chickens, adding things like wood or small branches to kind of mix in there. You can even do like broken down wood chips, although you don't want to add a lot of wood chips because they take out nitrogen. Maybe more like decomposed wood chips. You can add things like peat moss and cotton burrs and things like that. But in hügelkultur, they really just encourage a lot of like green manure, or sorry, green plants that they've kind of been growing all year like a cover crop, and then you cut them down and let them decompose and over the winter, and then you add like leaf litter on top of that and grass clippings on top of that, and then maybe in the following year you put on another layer of compost that's finished, and you'll have all that just breaking down inside of there, and that will be feeding the soil organisms that live in the soil. If that helps.
Great, thanks. Okay, so Robin had a question. Our county landfill has great mulch available, but I think it is made with human waste. Do you know if it is safe for growing vegetables?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it is made from human waste, and so it's considered safe. It just kind of depends on if you're comfortable with it. It's raised to a really high temperature, and people people have systems at their houses where they use decomposing toilets and then use human waste to add compost to soils. So as long as it's being brought up to a really high temperature, it is safe. Some people would rather put it on things like flowers and landscaping maybe that you're not eating, but it's not a problem to use it. So yeah, it just depends what you're comfortable with.
Okay, Sarah said, we tried drip irrigation, but it was problematic with our hard water. Do you have any suggestions?
Oh, because it would get clogged. Yeah, and I have heard about that a lot, of things getting clogged over time. I know that some people have more success with drip tape. Is not maybe just having a larger, because that 1/4-inch pipe or 1/4-inch drip line is really small, and then it has those really small holes and it can get clogged up. So drip tape can work better, but the problem with it is that it only really goes straight. It's hard to like curve it around everything. So if you have straight beds, then that can work well. But in terms of you could go through and just like scrub your lines. It just is a decent amount of work. I haven't had that issue yet, but I know that drip, it does take some maintenance. Like every spring you kind of have to go out and make sure all your lines are working and make sure there's not leaks. And if you have some clogged holes, maybe using like a stiff scrubber to scrub it, because that same thing happens on like our shower head and stuff too. And we scrub it off. So I think it's just a matter of keeping an eye on your maintenance.
Okay, Kristen would like to know, how high are your fences for deer? Anything else you have done to deter larger animals?
So our fence is 6 feet high, and then we have an electric fence band over the top of it. And that seems to keep out everything. We've been there for 2 years and I haven't had mammal problems. Although I think as my garden's developing more, like the chipmunks and the squirrels are starting to figure it out. I'm in White Rock and we don't have as many in this area. I know there is a lot more in certain areas up on the town site. What we did when we lived up on North Mesa was put, and I don't know if you can see that down in, let's see. Yeah, so on this picture that we're on right now on the screen, in that back, on the bottom picture in the back right corner is a cage that we built, and it's just PVC, and it's like a square cage that we made to fit over our beds. And I put them over all my beds because the squirrels would come in and just eat all of the new sprouts. I haven't really had to use them here, but that I know can be an issue. And then deer, yeah, they just don't seem to, they don't jump the fence. It's just too high, I think. And then what we also did, just in case, was I have motion sensor water sprayers. So if something does walk through, it sprays water on them at night.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. Can you top dress the non-garden beds with native soil to improve soil health? What would you use and when?
Top dress the say it again.
Can you top dress non-garden beds, native
Mhm.
soil to improve soil health? What would you use and when?
Okay, so like native soil that you want to plant something in, so you're adding things to the top is what I'm hearing on that question. Yes, yes, definitely. So if you're not wanting to dig down, I mean, it's a lot of work to dig down, obviously. And what a lot of people do with hügelkultur is they dig down like a foot and then they put the logs in and then they add all the layers on top of that. But you could just start it from the surface. So what I would do is do it like a hügelkultur system, and you put your logs down first. You put on top of that, you can put manure and smaller branches and wood chips and water, all those things to kind of bring that together. And then on top of that, I'd put some straw, I'd put grass clippings, leaves, and then I'd put a layer of finished compost, a little more straw, and then topsoil. So you're really just layering all those things. And then over time, they're going to break down and decompose. You're going to have a mound at that point. If you want it for a really large area, it kind of turns more into like lasagna composting or layered composting, if you've heard of that. And you can do that same thing just on a larger scale. Yeah, and that you're just building a hügelkultur bed really, and it's just breaking down over time.
Okay. Great.
I guess I didn't show, can I do this still? Oh, my last slide there, if we're out of time. Just some of the places to go to look for information. This book, I love this book, and it goes a lot over permaculture, and it has how to make hügelkultur beds in it, how to build soil, how to make swales. This movie has a really good perspective on why permaculture exists and the idea behind modeling a natural ecosystem. There's services around that can help. You can go to their actual place and they can come out to your property and help you with that. And then New Mexico State University has a lot of really great resources too. And they have a whole drip irrigation thing on how to make that. So there's lots of information out there to help. If you have any more questions for me, you can email me at my email there at the bottom, and I can also try and help in any way. Or if you want to come see my garden.
Okay, Denise, thank you so much for sharing this presentation with us. I would like to thank our guests for joining us tonight. If you would like to join us again, please visit the PEEC website for more information and to register for upcoming live talks. Please follow us on our PEEC YouTube channel to revisit any of our online presentations, including this one. So we should have this one up on our YouTube channel in a week or two. So thanks again. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
and have a great night.